this disorder affects so many people. The idea that there's hope is such a huge thing. And people on our board and people who are working with us, they understand that message and have seen how they can change people's lives.
Hi, my name is Joe, and I'm an alcoholic. Those are the 9 words that changed my life immeasurably for the better when I said them and meant them for the first time on May 31st, 2019. I had my last drink on May 30th, 2019, after which my now ex-wife gave me an ultimatum: choose booze or my family. I chose my family, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that my rock bottom wasn't anywhere near as low as other people's, in that I didn't lose my home, I didn't lose my job, I didn't lose my family. I was able to pick up the pieces and move on, and I haven't had a drink since, nor do I have a desire to have one. It was time to quit, and quite frankly, although there had been ultimatums before, I knew she meant it that time, and it was like a weight had been lifted off my back because drinking had become a big problem for me. So the reason I'm telling you all this is to set up the episode for today. I'm interviewing Heather Allen from the Canadian Alcohol Use Disorder Society, and she's going to talk about some treatments that are available for alcohol use disorder, aka alcoholism. This is a subject that's near and dear to my heart because her society builds on the work of the late Dr. Jeff Harries, who around the time I stopped drinking was starting to preach his message about these drugs to other doctors and healthcare professionals. And I, as a news reporter, got very interested in this subject. As I said, it's near and dear to my heart. I'll tell you a bit about my drinking. I'd like to say I come by it naturally. My father was an alcoholic, and I grew up in that environment. So I believe I'm genetically predisposed to it. And also the environmental conditions of growing up as a kid in an alcoholic household. It's chaos. If you're someone who has an alcoholic parent, you know what I'm talking about. It's chaos. And for me, the result was I turned to alcohol to deal with the fallout from that. And I found myself doing the exact same things my dad did that absolutely disgusted me. And I said I would never do. And yet there I was doing them. I started drinking in my teenage years, like most people. I was never a quote unquote social drinker. I went to the extreme. I wanted to get drunk. I didn't like just getting a little buzz. I had to get full on drunk. The drunker, the better. And that carried on through my teenage years, through my early adulthood, into my 30s. A few years before I quit drinking, my now ex-wife again expressed concern, and we came up with a deal, and I would only have 3 drinks per night. And so that went well for a while, but the problem was I was having 3 drinks in front of her, 3 drinks behind closed doors. I had a bottle of vodka generally somewhere, and I was drinking that as well. As I said, I couldn't just get a little buzz on. I had to get full on drunk. And so when everything finally collapsed on May 31st, 2019, I didn't know what to do. So I went to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. It was not the first time I'd been to one. I'd gone to a few over the course of my life because I knew I had a drinking problem. I guess I was curious, but it never stuck. This time though, I was desperate. I had nowhere else to go. I was on the risk of losing my family, and I needed help. So I went to that meeting, and that's what I said. Hi, my name is Joe, and I'm an alcoholic, and I meant it. And something clicked at that meeting. I'll tell you very briefly about the 12 steps programs. I'm not here to advocate for them, but step 1 says something like, came to accept that we were powerless over alcohol, and our lives had become unmanageable. And to me, that said exactly where I was. I was powerless to control my drinking, and my life had become unmanageable. And so that's where I started. I did AA meetings for about a year, and I read the big book, and I struggled with some of the steps. 12-step programs aren't for everybody. It was helpful for me in the beginning, and I still do attend the odd meeting, but there are other things available, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight on this episode, about these specific treatments. The reason it really strikes me, this topic, because although I didn't need these medications to quit drinking, I think someone like my father, who was a long-standing, deeply entrenched alcoholic, I think someone like him, if these drugs could have made a difference in his life, they would have made a huge difference in my life too, if he was able to stop drinking. So if this episode helps even one person quit drinking, or helps a person's loved one quit drinking, I will consider it a success. And also, if you or a loved one is having trouble with drinking, and you just want to talk, or you just want to vent, I'm all ears. Send me an email, deepfryerpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. And if I can offer any words of wisdom or comfort, I'd be glad to do that. So without further ado, here's my interview with Heather Allen from the Canadian Alcohol Use Disorder Society. Welcome back to the Deep Fryer Podcast. I'm Joe Fries. I'm pleased to be joined today by Heather Allen from the Canadian Alcohol Use Disorder Society. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you.
Tell us briefly about yourself, the society, and the man whose work you're following up on.
Okay, great. Well, I'm the communications director for the Canadian Alcohol Use Disorder Society, which we started in 2020. And really how it all began was with Dr. Jeff Harries, who I think you know, who's
Yes.
a local family physician, who he had for decades been treating alcohol use disorder as a medical condition with certain medications he was having success with his patients. And then it was like 2017, he went to a conference in Vancouver and he was talking about alcohol use disorder, and he had this like aha moment. He looked around the room and the colleagues and the healthcare workers and people were there were kind of looking at him, and he realized that this information he thought was known by everybody was really not well known at all.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off. And so the society now has taken up the torch, so to speak, and is carrying on the work.
that's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
Okay.
So the first part is really that he came back from that conference. He has like 9 kids and he's got a busy life. And being Jess, he's like, I'm not just going to take the information and try and change it. And so he started himself trying to talk to anybody he could talk to, built his way up to traveling across BC and Alberta, talking to thousands of different people about this. Yeah. But then in, I think it was 2019, he was diagnosed with ALS.
Mhm. Yeah. And these thousands of people he talked to, we're talking judges, lawyers, doctors, police officers, everybody, anybody who would listen and who could make a difference.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was always kind of his mantra too. Like every person, who they are, where they come from, what they're doing, it's equally interested in their story and helping them.
A note about terminology here. I refer to myself as a recovered alcoholic, and I use the word alcoholism, but Heather, as you heard her say, alcohol use disorder. So we can just, Heather, can you just describe the two terms? Are they interchangeable, and why do you prefer alcohol use disorder?
Yeah, I think it's not something that's entirely settled yet, but we call it alcohol use disorder to highlight that it's a medical condition, that it's actually something that affects your brain function in a way. And so what happens is it just compels some people to crave alcohol in a way that other people don't. And it can happen to anyone at any point in their life.
Yep.
And so to understand it as a medical condition, treatable one, that is to then say that it's not a moral failing. It's not something that's wrong with you. So it's not a drinking problem. It's not your problem. It's a disorder, just like heart disease, diabetes. So that's why we use that term.
Okay. You've not used the word stigma, but that's part of it too, right?
Exactly.
Reduce the stigma around it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, that to set the scene a little bit more, in terms of the prevalence of alcoholism or alcohol use disorder in Canada and the South Okanagan in general, can you speak to that as well? How many people are suffering?
Yeah. So hopefully I have these stats. But in general,
do your best.
yeah. In general, about 1 in 5 people will be directly, and this is across Canada, directly impacted by alcohol use disorder at some point in their life. And so he's saying, and when we have been having so many conversations with people, I'm not sure I've met anybody who hasn't been indirectly impacted. So, other statistics, in BC or here in the Interior Health, we have the highest alcohol consumption rate in BC in the Interior, and then also the highest hospitalization rate. Yeah. It's actually a bigger issue than opioids.
I know I'm springing this question on you, but do you have any sense of why the rates are higher here than in other places? Is anyone looking at that question?
That is an interesting question. that I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah.
Some people have thought, well, have you parsed the data out enough to show, is it like tourism that is driving up with the industry or not?
Yeah.
And I can't really answer that,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Now, the heart of Dr. Harry's and mission was to talk about the treatments for alcohol use disorder. And by treatments, we're talking something about as simple as pills, like a couple pills a day or one pill a day, correct? Okay. And there are a few different pills. So I guess we'll state up front, neither Heather nor I is a doctor, nor are we pretending to be, or do we claim to be. So we're not going to tell you and ourselves what these drugs are called and how they work. Tell us just give us an overview of what these treatments are and what we're going to hear this doctor explain in this video clip coming up.
Yes, for sure. So like you said, there's several medications that can be used to curb cravings for alcohol.
Yep.
And they're prescribed by a family doctor or a nurse practitioner.
Yep.
So you would go to your doctor's office, and like as part of your health plan, they would talk to you about how old were you when you started drinking? What is your consumption habits? What are your drinking goals? Like, do you want to reduce only, or do you want to reduce heavy drinking days? And that all impacts the type of medication that you might be prescribed. And then, in addition to that, I mentioned about these medications is that this isn't just something that Jeff dreamed up. These are proven by the BC Centre on Substance Use, the Mayo Clinic, and other people. And there's prescribing guidelines out for BC, which is the leading province in Canada, and there's national ones coming out soon. But the key point about these medications is that it's to turn drinking alcohol from a compulsion to a choice. And so the person really just usually takes it for a short period of time. Sometimes you have to trial a few different medications or take combination until your brain has healed. And then you have recovered. You're healed. You're better. You won't have the cravings anymore. So there's two really great things about this treatment option. We really look at it as an approach because it's more than just you take a pill. Is that it doesn't exclude other options. So maybe you just need to get a hold of your cravings so you can have stability to go to counseling, or you want to do other programs, or you have traditional support. So it's all a part of that. And then the second one was the thing I was mentioning earlier. Is this not abstinence-based?
Yes.
Right? So you don't have to white knuckle yourself to sobriety. You don't have to always say you're an alcoholic for life. Main thing is, I think I said this already, but it's based on your personal drinking goals. So some people want to stop altogether, and the new guidelines that came out that said less is more. It's all shocking to us.
Yeah.
2 drinks a week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe people just want to reduce, or they just want to have less binge drinking days.
Yeah.
And so then you work with the different medications to what suits the person. So it's basically just putting your health and your choices back in your hands.
Heather, you mentioned how the drugs used part of a treatment plan, abstinence-based or traditional values. I presume part of that might mean Alcoholics Anonymous, 12-step programs, that sort of thing. Can you just elaborate on that a bit, please?
For sure. It's really, like I said, about personal choice and helping people just overcome their cravings so that they can deal with whatever issues they might have, or not at all.
Yeah.
Family, and if the AA works to go and speak to people and have someone who's a support there for you, that's great. Or if you have a counselor that you want to see about trauma that maybe was what triggered your drinking in the first place, well, now you have the stability to show up to the appointment on time to be able to work with your family on it.
I know it sounds unbelievable that there are pills or drugs you can take to help reduce drinking, and I felt the same way the first time I heard this 4 or 5 years ago, and it's still news to some people. But I assure you, these things exist. So, but don't believe it. Don't take it from me. Take it from a doctor, an actual doctor, whose clip we're going to watch now.
So, out of the medications that have evidence to support treatment for alcohol use disorder, there are currently 4 that are approved by the BC Centre of Substance Use, which is one of the set of guidelines that we use here in BC to help guide our treatment of this disorder. The 4 medications being naltrexone, acamprosate, gabapentin, and topiramate. I'll go through each of these individually and discuss some reasons why we might choose one over the other when finding a treatment option for a specific patient. So naltrexone. Naltrexone works by binding the reward receptors within the brain, helping prevent the euphoria that comes with alcohol consumption, helping prevent binge drinking, and hopefully reducing the number of heavy drinking days or heavy numbers of alcoholic beverages someone drinks in a setting. I think about using this medication in someone who suffers from binge drinking or blackouts, or, who tells me I can never have just one drink. It's a medication that can be taken every day. It's also a medication that could be taken when they know they're going to be exposed to the situation where they may tend to drink heavily, such as getting together with their friends or, in a Christmas party setting. Naltrexone is also a medication that's safe to start while someone is still drinking. Second medication I'd like to speak about is acamprosate. So acamprosate is a medication that has good evidence to support abstinence. It's often started within the first week after complete alcohol cessation. It helps achieve abstinence by interacting with various parts of the brain and preventing relapse. It also has the tendency to reduce some of the symptoms of anxiety, insomnia that are associated with those first few weeks of stopping drinking. I think it's important to distinguish the difference between acamprosate and naltrexone, being acamprosate will not help people stop drinking if they are drinking, so it's really only intended to be used when someone is not currently drinking. Third medication would be gabapentin. Gabapentin acts by binding to the same or similar receptors in the brain that alcohol does. The GABA receptors, which when alcohol is not around, are responsible for causing some of the withdrawal symptoms, including tremor, anxiety, insomnia, agitation. So by prescribing gabapentin, typically at a dose of 600 milligrams 3 times a day, this helps by binding those receptors and reducing those symptoms of anxiety, reducing the symptoms of agitation and insomnia, and allowing the brain more time to return back to balance or homeostasis without chronic alcohol around. This medication certainly can be reduced and is not necessarily intended to be long-term. Like acamprosate, this is a medication that's typically used after the patient has abstained from alcohol. Fourth medication would be topiramate, typically used in people who have a history of significant cocaine or stimulant use, who struggle with labile emotions, anger, violence, or have a history of PTSD or migraines. It helps promote alcohol reduction and abstinence by acting on the same receptors that are involved in the dopamine reward and reinforcing pathway involved in addiction. There's also been some studies that suggest its pathophysiology may lead to reduction of symptoms of anxiety and depression in the early phases of abstinence. So these 4 medications can be used effectively, safely, at a reasonable cost and reasonable tolerability to our patients struggling with alcohol use disorder. It is important to remember that each individual medication is different and the indications are different. So it's important to understand the patient factors, the symptoms they're experiencing, and what medication might be best for them to help them achieve their drinking goals.
Okay, fascinating stuff. One point I want to add, Heather, when I did speak with Dr. Harries years ago, I remember him mentioning that these treatments can be effective on anyone from the guy on the street who's lost it all to professionals who are still working in the community. I do. That's correct, right? It can work for anybody.
It can. That's what we've found, and the evidence points to that if you use the right medication or the combination of medication or and work on the timings of it, it can work for anybody.
Okay, so Heather, just to maybe start wrapping up a little bit, Tell us a bit about what CODS is up to. I'm not even sure if we should call it CODS, Canadian AUD Society. What's the preference?
So we personally call it CODS because Canadian Alcohol Use Disorder Society is so long.
Yes.
And funny because Jeff, who was like a person who thought of an idea, he was going to do it. Like when I was saying, when he had ALS and he got that diagnosis.
Yes.
And for people who don't know, ALS is disease. It's a really awful disease. It's got a short term and it's fatal. There's no cure. Takes away your voluntary muscle actions, chewing, talking, walking. Anyway, he had all of that and he was still like, we're going to do this. And why don't we, to continue my legacy, we have a society. And so we first started off and we were registering the name, the BC AUD Society, before we'd even finalized the bill for the domain name. He's like, actually, I think everyone in Canada should know about this. So we're like, okay, now we're the Canadian AUD Society.
Okay.
One time, and he was just losing his voice. He hardly talk anymore. And it's like, can't believe this. I went from BC to Canadian.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's almost like you're going to tell me international next. And he had this funny look on his face. Like, yeah, we've already talked about that.
Okay.
Really, more to come.
Okay. So his ambitions were national in scope for sure.
Yes.
And I want to get back to that. But first, can you just give us a sense of what CODS is doing these days? What interesting project underway in Princeton? Can you just tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So to back up, we advocate for in 4 different kind of areas to help people directly impacted by AUD, to help educate health practitioners, and to work within the research community. So to make sure that we're pulling out the latest evidence for people. And then the last one is working community. Yeah. So we're developing all kinds of videos and resources and things for prescribers and stuff like that. But in the community project,
yes,
we're working in Princeton because the model is to work with community leaders so that they understand and can support alcohol use disorder in communities to help them think about it differently. Yeah. So what we did is we had a big flagship event out in Princeton in November, and we had police and educators and council members there.
I'll interject. For people who don't know, Princeton's a town of about 5,000 people, about 90 minutes from Penticton Drive in the Sebelkmean, about halfway from here to Hope. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And actually, we picked Princeton for a few reasons. And one of them was that Jeff had been there several times and presented to the prescribers, so they were all on board.
Yeah.
Sweet. The last thing you want to do is go to a community and get everybody excited, and the healthcare part isn't there.
Yeah.
So anyway, so in the morning we talked all about what is alcohol use disorder, just basically what we're talking about here today. And then in the afternoon we had this session where we talked about how did you deal with fires? How did you deal with floods? And they're an amazing community, and they had all this networking that they use. And what happens if you did that to tell people about alcohol use disorder and about the care that's going on in Princeton? Because Princeton's really quite a leading place. Every prescriber there knows about it.
Yeah.
And if you go there, you can get treatment. So anyway, so from that in the afternoon, then the community leaders came together. They formed a working group. They meet every 2 weeks. They have gone to schools. They've gone to volunteer fairs. They're talking to the town council. They've got a big event planned for their city square in summer.
Are you, I don't know how you measure the results or something like that, but have you thought about how you would measure the results? And if so, how?
I really have. And actually, my colleagues at the University of Alberta, communications and engagement professors, are teaming up with us to help introduce this model and then to measure it. Yeah, we got all kinds of great partners. Community Foundation, who's helping us build relationships, and working at clinicians with interior health.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hope you can come back and tell us about the results when they're ready.
Well, because the idea is we're going to spread to other communities. We're making this change toolkit so we can keep going.
Yeah. Okay. And just finally, you touched on it before, but as you said, the name Canadian Alcohol Use Disorder Society, it speaks to something national in scope. You're based in Penticton. How do you grow something from a small city like this to something truly national in scope? How do you do it? How are you going to do it?
You know what? I love that you asked this question. I love that you asked it last because it comes right back to Jeff.
Yeah.
Because Jeff, when he started out, he had a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
People were like, they didn't know about the information. They didn't want to hear it. And he just kept going. And people said, you can't do that until we have systems in place for you to do your talks. And he kept saying, well, why not? You can catch up to me. Why not? And so then when we said we're going from the BCAD Society to the Canadian, we're just taking that same sentiment. It's like, why not? When it's a national organization that advocates for a major disease starting in our little small town.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you, what would it look like? I mean, eventually they'll be hiring lobbyists in Ottawa or in the headquarters there. We're getting ahead of ourselves. What can the work be done from Penticton?
I think the work can be done from Penticton, but yes, it will be spreading out, and we've got sequencing plans and things, and fundraising.
Good.
And we've got some structure. We've got some really great, smart people on our team and our board, because that's one thing is this disorder affects so many people, and the idea that there's hope is such a huge thing. And people on our board and people who are working with us, they understand that message and have seen how they can change people's lives. Like, we are the most dedicated team out there, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, I'm sure how you feel too.
Yes.
Like when you hear Jeff and you've seen people, he has literally changed their lives.
Yeah.
And we have an organization where we can do that too. Like, I don't have all the answers of how, but we're going to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Heather, you're giving me goosebumps. Final thoughts, calls to action. People want to know more about alcohol use disorder or CODS. What can they do?
Yeah, so you can go on our website, which is CODS.org, which is CAUDS.org. We've got videos, resources, some ideas about how to start a care journey, a sample letter you can take to your care provider, because that's the thing is we don't want to raise expectations too much. The fact is that lots of people in the community don't know about this, but it's still something that's working its way up to be learned about in the medical community as well. So messages is we're advocating and we're trying to work in all these circles, but people can advocate for themselves too.
And it's also a registered society. It's easy to donate to the website as well. Well, if you want to support them.
So we're actually working on getting our registered charitable status. So we're a nonprofit right now, and the Community Foundation is our sort of umbrella organization for it. So we fall as a project underneath them.
Heather, appreciate you being here.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
If you were lucky enough to see one of Jeff's many presentations about new treatment options for alcohol use disorder, you'll remember his hand-drawn slides and his warm welcome.
Thanks so much for coming out. I know you have busy lives, but I am thrilled to be able to speak to you about this.
In these presentations, Jeff had a remarkable ability to make people feel comfortable with new knowledge.
You'll all wonder, oh my gosh, how did I go through life not knowing this? And don't feel bad about that, because most of us didn't know about this for the longest time.
Jeff was humble when recognized for his work. He was driven by his compassion for every single person he was able to help.
Let me tell you about another patient of mine. He was a 26-year-old whose life was very chaotic from heavy drinking, and he wanted peace. He tried one of these medications, and I texted him asking him how things were going 3 weeks later, and this is the text I got. You need to spread this to anyone who will listen, just like I've been doing the last 2 years. You need to embrace and radiate the hope, and hope's a big part of this, that knowing a course of meds can stop the terrible impact of untreated or undertreated alcoholism and substance use. Thanks so much.